If you said anything untoward in the introduction, I didn't hear
No, don't think so.
it. Okay, just let me boot up the presentation. So the way I wanted to do this today was to not talk so much about what labels are and what's on them as how they work. So am I sharing my screen with you yet?
No.
Okay, let me just get in. I can't see the Zoom meeting and my screen at the same time. It blocks me out. Okay, how's that?
Uh, it's up now.
Okay, I'll go into meeting mode. Okay, so I'll just start. So I wanted to talk more about how labels work than what's on them because I figure at the level that we're at, most of you should be able to decipher a label, to know what's on it, to know where to find things. So I don't want to spend a lot of time with that. And if you do need to know that, you could always go back to your basic training course and refresh your memory. So what I wanted to do is start with just some questions just to assess the level of the group and see where you're at. So I'm going to start with a few questions about the principal display panel, the secondary display panel, and the precautionary statements.
And that poll should be up now.
Okay, so here we're at the bridge of questions. So for those of you who don't know this, this is from um, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So you are the highly skilled professional agrologist with unique skills in pest management. And I'm Ronnie. I'm starting to look more like this guy all the time. And you're going to say, ask me the questions, bridge keeper. I am not afraid. So we'll move into a label quiz. And this is a real label, heat ADV label. So I wanted to look at a real label rather than some of the labels that you've seen that are put together for your courses, because I know a lot of people just tend to memorize them. So I have three questions about this label. Just a minute here. I think with your poll and quizzes, it's blocking out, it's blocking my advance. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the first question about the label is what is the use? And you have a choice of 1 to 5. So I'm looking for everyone to pick the correct answer. So for heat ADV, what is the use? Commercial saprophenicil suspension concentrate, bulk, or herbicide? The second question is what is the guarantee statement? And there are 4 choices. And the next question is what are the precautionary words, statements, symbols, or handling precautions that are on the label? And there are 5 choices. Sean, maybe you can guide me. I'm not sure how long I should allow for people to go through these questions.
Yeah, it looks like we're having a lot of the questions come in now. And uh, as you kind of expected, we are sitting about at that 80-ish% range.
Excellent. Okay, that's what I was hoping for. Okay, I'll move on. The reason we're doing this is I have a basic presentation and an advanced presentation. And if we weren't getting over 75 on this first basic quiz, then that was going to force me into giving the basic presentation. But I think we'll be moving on to the advanced. But there are more questions. I have another set of 3 questions. Which notices are precautionary statements? And you can see they're color coded off to the left, A, B, C, D, and E. So which notices are precautionary statements?
And this poll should be live now.
Okay, here we go. Then the second question is which notices have environmental information? And the third question, which notices include the notice to buyer? How are we doing, Sean?
All right, it looks like shooting around 55% here.
Okay, these are a little harder because they're multiple choices. Okay, I'll skip to the next. Are we concluded?
Yeah, we should be good.
Okay. Losing my ability to go forward. There we go. Okay, and then this last one has the method of application, field sprayer or aerial, and there are buffer zone questions on this one. So the first question is, what is the buffer zone for aerial application with a rotary wing aircraft to Timothy near an estuarine habitat that's 5 meters deep?
It seems like some people are having some difficulty reading the text on smaller screens. Do you just mind kind of reading it out for the audience here?
Here,
Yeah, that would be great because then they'll have the question and answer on their side.
okay, I'll make this one bigger. Okay, so here's question 1 and question 2.
Oh, great. Just gonna quickly check how the mobile looks for our mobile users. But it looks like most people are getting the first two questions.
Okay. So I'll flip to the last question then. Okay, and this one has 9 choices, so this is a lot more difficult question, but why do labels indicate the total number of applications that may be made in a single season? And you have that question here, so I'll zoom in to the part of the label that shows the number of applications that can be made.
In progress.
Okay. For the mobile users, if you close the quiz, you can come back to it by pressing the three little buttons on the bottom slide there and then going back into polls quizzes. But otherwise, I do hope that the image in chat does help with readability. Please let me know if not. It looks like we've got answers from most folks here, with 77% going for 9, which is the correct answer, 1, 3, 4, and 6.
That is really good. That was a hard question. I had to look that one up myself after I made it to make sure I had the right one, but that's a good answer. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll move to the advanced presentation. Obviously, people know their labels. Okay, so what I have and are real life label scenarios. So this is more the world that I live in with labels. It's not so much looking at the label and trying to find things like the registration number or the guarantee or the buffer strips or things like that. It's more how do labels work? How do labels work in conjunction with other labels? So for example, where you're tank mixing or where you're adding adjuvants. And then what happens if there's information on a label that you don't necessarily understand and you have to go somewhere else to look for information? So there is no quiz in this. These are just real life examples of things that I've run into with labels where people have called me up and say, I don't really understand. Could you help interpret? Or we have issues with what we've done. And that's what we'd like to avoid. Lost control of my. Okay. Label scenario 1. I can't seem to advance.
I can close the poll if it's giving you some problems.
Yeah, it's not letting me advance properly. I'm locked into my mode now.
Will it be something you have to restart Prezi for?
I don't know. I'm totally seems to be interacting with the program's interacting with my computer. I'm going to stop share
Okay.
and go back in. No, I'm definitely locked here.
Okay. Will you need to quickly drop out and come back in?
Yeah, I might have to. Um, yeah, this is totally locked my screen now.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm gonna have to reboot and come back in.
Okay. Do you have an idea of how long it'll take?
A couple minutes.
Okay. Oh. So in the meantime, while Ron is rebooting, apologies for the technical difficulties there. But feel free to fill up any water, grab a quick snack. I imagine that this will kind of eat into the break at the end of this session, before the next one, but shouldn't be too much of an issue, fingers crossed. Um, I can make an announcement when Ron does return. But in the meantime, uh, thank you for staying with us. The polls quizzes in the bottom banner is in the three dots. I'm just quickly pulling it up on my phone to send a screenshot. And then, oh, should be in there. And then once you do pop it up, that's where it will come through. On the laptop, it should be right next to any apps or share if that's still on your screen. I do have a bit of a different view, but should be right in that bottom banner if you just move your mouse around, the same one where your audio and video will be. Send this in.
I'm gonna try and share again, and hopefully that that doesn't lock me out. Okay, now it's going, and hopefully we move on here. Okay, so the first scenario is we have a tank mix of Desica, which is diquat, and Li 700, which is an 80% surfactant blend, and it's applied to field peas as a harvest aid. So this was a situation that was brought to my attention, and we had a warning to the custom applicator on the license audit that said there were some issues with this tank mix. Now, this took me about an hour to figure out, so it was quite complicated, but this is the process that we went through. The first thing we did was we went to the Pest Management Regulatory Agency search of all products containing diquat. And we found 3, Desica, Reglone, and Stage. So I pulled up the front labels and we've looked at them. And from what I could tell is every label is identical. All products were registered for use on pulse crops, and peas a pulse crop. All products contain the same active ingredient, which is diquat at the same concentration, which is 240 grams per liter. So the best I could tell, they were all identical. And I've highlighted those. The next thing we did was we went to the Li 700 label. It said it's a harvest aid. It can be tank mixed with Reglone and Stage. So it's tank mixable with diquat. It could be used as a harvest aid. So I thought, well, we should be good then. Why would there be an issue? But there was some ambiguity. So we looked at the Desica label, which was the product that was used. When you go into the crops, you see that even though the front label says that you can desiccate pulses, if you go into the actual crop listing in the harvest aid statements, you see that field peas aren't listed as a crop, only beans and lentils. And the Desica brand of diquat isn't on the label. Only the Stage and the Reglone are listed. So I thought, well, what if the crop were treated with soybeans, which are labeled, and you can see if you look down in the harvest aid, in beans, it's listing white kidney, red kidney, soybeans, and Adzukis, but soybeans are in there. So what if the crop were treated with soybeans? Would we have been okay with this tank mix with Desica? And it came back with the same issue is Li 700 can only be mixed with Reglone or Stage, but not Desica, according to the label. Even though when we looked at the label, we saw that they were all identical products. So this isn't a question or an answer session. It's just to show you how you need to look at more than one label before you make any decisions. And it's really important here to completely read through the Desica label and to completely read through the Li 700 label. Because if you just looked at the front page of the labels, you might have been confused. So you really need to get in there and dig deep into the label to find out what all the details are. I'll open it up if there are any questions about this kind of a scenario. And you can just let me know if anyone has any questions, Sean.
Absolutely nothing's coming through yet, but I'll let you know if I see anything.
Okay, yeah, so I thought this would be pretty self-explanatory. The applicator was given a warning, and when it came to me to look through it, I thought, well, it was the warning was justified. The next label scenario, and we've run into this when we're looking at the minor use program, and I spend a lot of time with minor use crops. We end up with a lot of questions about labels when we start trying to add a new crop to a label, even if we're using the same use pattern that is already on the label. So here we had Odyssey WDG was applied to fenugreek for forage production. So this is just a scenario that we were looking into. And then we said, well, can the fenugreek be fed to livestock? So fenugreek's not a widely grown crop, but there are buyers for fenugreek in Saskatchewan now, and they have a lot of novel uses. So we're spending a lot of time trying to get labels updated so that fenugreek is included as a crop on the Odyssey label. And fenugreek's a curiosity because it's actually a legume crop, but it fits into the spice group for labeling regulations. So when we tried to add fenugreek to the label, the first thing we had to check was whether or not fenugreek was included on the Canadian feed ingredients table. So it should have been listed in class 1, forages and roughages. So I went into class 1, forages and roughages, and this table goes on and on. I couldn't find fenugreek in there. I could find alfalfa grass, hay, sun-cured ground, or alfalfa grass meal. I could find things like grass alfalfa hay, sun-cured ground, or grass alfalfa meal. Nothing on fenugreek. So fenugreek isn't listed as a forage or a roughage by the CFIA.
Do you have any idea what would have caused the issue with that specific diquat formulation?
Oh, okay, going back to the previous question with the diquat.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, the labels are identical. I don't know how the manufacturing process works, but it could have been that manufacturing process created all of those same jugs in the same place, and then they could have had different labels slapped on them. And I don't know that for sure. The point is that if you're looking at the labeling rules, Desica cannot be tank mixed with Li 700. Even though it's identical to Reglone and even though it's identical to Stage, the label doesn't allow for the tank mix. So from a technical point of view, I guess what we're really concerned about is maximum residue limits in the end product. And from my perspective, something like maximum residue limits, if we're looking at identical formulations, then I wouldn't have thought that there should be a difference between any of those formulations. But if you look at the label and the label does not allow for the tank mix, that means you can't tank mix it. So this is where you end up in these ambiguous situations. And I know it's an issue for dealerships where you're selling products and you carry one brand but not another. And there's so many generic products out there right now that you could have the exact same product with the same components in the same concentration. So all the active ingredients in these different products may be identical. They're not the same formulation, but the labels are different, and you may sell one brand over another. But it just points out that you have to be really careful to read the label, because if you do get audited and the auditor says, well, you're off label, well, you're off label. So it's a technical issue, but these are the kinds of things I get called about on a regular basis, is where there's ambiguity and confusion. So it just shows you that it's good that you did well on that basic quiz, because it shows you know the labels. But there are lots of areas where labels interact. So does that answer the question?
I believe it would.
Okay, I know it's hard with 70 some people
Yeah, just keeping an eye on chat, but
to
I'll
ask,
save
but
a follow-up for later if you want to continue. Thank you.
okay, so that's the basic answer there. So fenugreek isn't approved as a forage or roughage. So then I went to the Justice Law's website. So we're really digging into the details here and said, well, are there exemptions? I mean, you've got fenugreek grown on a farm by a farmer. It's being applied with a product. It's labeled for use. The label says that you can use it on fenugreek and harvest the forage as livestock feed. And when I look into the exemptions, I see that by my reading, that fenugreek should fit into the exempt category. So it shouldn't have to fit into the approved livestock forages or roughages. It should be exempt because it's a feed. It's not novel feed. There's no genetic construct in there that's making it novel, no trait that's making it novel. It's grown on a farm and it's sold by the grower, and it doesn't contain any substances that present a risk of harm to human or animal health and the environment. So by my estimation, this should have been exempt. So can fenugreek forage be fed to livestock? We tried to get fenugreek added to the label. The PMRA came back and said, well, it's technically not listed as a forage or feed. And I said, well, it's exempt. The PMRA said, well, you'll have to go back to the CFIA and ask them. So we went back through the minor use coordinator in Saskatchewan to the CFIA and said, well, we have to be exempt. So initially, when this is put on the label, this forage is an exemption from the regulations. Can you make a ruling on this? What we're faced with is if the CFIA comes back and says, well, no, it probably isn't exempt. If they say it isn't exempt, then I have a list of about 10 or 12 forage grasses that we grow commonly in Western Canada that are used as feed that meet these exemptions that are then going to have to be added to that schedule of livestock feed. So it just opens up a whole other area of labeling where it's not really clear on what the answer is. So this one, I don't have an answer for it, and I don't expect you to have an answer for it, but I'm just pointing out some of the things that you can run into when you have to go through the label and look for more details. Now I want to go into this one insecticides applied to mustard, and mustard isn't as common as canola, where you have tens of millions of acres of canola and maybe 400,000 to 600,000 acres of mustard grown. But most people think of mustard and canola as about the same thing when it comes to labeling. They're in the same family. They're both classified as oil seeds. They're both susceptible to the same pests, which are primarily flea beetles. So the general opinion seems to be that if you're growing mustard, you're essentially growing canola, and you have the same slate of products that can be used. So the question I had was, can mustard be treated with all insecticides labeled for use on mustard? And this gets a little bit tricky, but it's an interesting scenario to go through. It depends. Here I pulled the Phyphanon label. Phyphanon's generic malathion. It's been registered for ages. I mean, it was generic before I started my career in agriculture, which is a long time back. But I look at that little green highlight there. It says Phyphanon can be applied to mustard, rape, including canola. So if you looked at the front page, you would think, well, okay, canola, mustard, same difference. But then you look somewhere else on the label, you dig a little deeper into the label, you think you're okay. But then I go down to method of application, where the method of application is the field sprayer, and we're good to apply Phyphanon with a field sprayer. It says you can apply it to mustard, but then it says condiment type only, which leaves me thinking, what's a condiment type? Like I always thought that mustard was mustard. And early on in my career, I always understood mustard was mustard, but now we're talking about canola and mustard being the same thing on the front panel, but then we're looking at method of application in the field sprayer, they're referring to condiment mustard. So that brought up some questions. Then I went to another label. I went to the Warrior label, which is lambda cyhalothrin. And if you look at the highlight underneath the label, underneath the skull and crossbones, you see 11.4 oilseed crops, canola and mustard, but in brackets, oilseed type. So now we're looking at this and saying, well, we have one label, which was the Phyphanon malathion label, that's saying it could be applied to mustard, which are condiment types. On the Warrior label, it says we can apply it to mustard oilseed types. And now that brought up some more questions. So now you have to think about, what's the end use of the mustard crop? And I'll be right up front. I had to go to a mustard exporter last year and ask the mustard exporters what the end use is of the mustard. I didn't know if the mustard was being crushed for oil like canola, or if it was being used as whole seed, as a baking ingredient, or whether or not it was being ground up into powder. So if we have oilseed mustard and condiment mustard, which crop group is mustard in? And if we have labels that say one product, one insecticide can be used on oilseed mustards, and the other label says it can only be used on condiment mustard, and we have to adhere to the label, then where do we go with this? So the next step is to go into the residue chemistry crop groups. And I don't know how much time a lot of you might spend in this area. I spend a lot of time in residue chemistry crop groups because this really affects the whole minor use process. If you want to add a new crop, and we have a lot of new crops coming into Western Canada. Fenugreek is one that I'm working with now that's coming in a big way. The other one is lupin, and I'm doing a lot of work with lupin. And the other one is poppy. And I've done a lot of work with poppies as well. So we have a lot of new crops coming in. And if you need to get a maximum residue limit set for that crop so that you can export that crop or use it in some kind of a food or animal product, then you need the MRL. So you need to have the residue work done. What the crop groups do is allow you to cross between groups. So for example, here's oil seeds. Oil seeds are in crop group 20. And you can see there's 3 mustards listed: Brassica nigra, Sinapis alba, which is essentially a similar one, Brassica campestris, and Brassica juncea. So we have 3 brassicas, 1 sinapis that are all mustard seed. They're all considered oil seeds. But then when I look into the spice group, which is crop group 26, I also find mustard in crop group 26, which is a spice. And this is where we're talking condiments. So I have one label that's saying insecticides can be applied to oilseed mustard, and other labels saying insecticides can be applied to condiment mustard. So I have oil seeds in crop group 20 and spices in crop group 26. Well, where do we go from here? Back to the question, how's the mustard crop being used in the country that's importing the mustard? What I found out is most Canadian grown mustard is exported for processing, and it's processed into condiment mustard. So most of it's powdered, and it's mixed up with vinegar, water, a lot of spices, and it goes into, it's either used as powdered mustard or it's blended up with ingredients and it goes into a mustard container. And this is like your common mustard container that you see on any restaurant table that's yellow. That's the mustard that we're talking about. It's condiment mustard. And most of the Canadian mustard's condiment mustard. But you can also crush mustard seed and extract the oil and sell it as mustard oil. Or you can crush the mustard seed, sell the oil, and the residue that's left over is the meal. And the meal can also be used as a condiment. So the next thing, I went to the Health Canada website and I searched on mustard and looked at all the labels with mustard, trying to focus on insecticides, pulled up quite a few different things here, including some fungicides. But I looked at crop subgroup 20A, which is rapeseed. So oil seeds are in 20A, which is a subset of crop group 20. And I looked at some labels. And in this particular label, it says crop subgroup 20A rapeseed and mustard seed is listed. And in the method of application with field sprayer, it says that I can apply it to oilseed types of mustard. I also found labels where the mustard is a condiment type, where it's crop group 26. And here it says canola or mustard condiment type only, not oilseed type. And again, in some of the fine text on the label, I'm also reading mustard condiment type only. And then I went into other labels and I'm getting condiment and oilseed. This one says seed treatment to canola, rapeseed, and mustard, including condiment and oilseed types, which includes crop group 20 and crop group 26. It also provides more detail at the bottom. It's specifying yellow and brown mustard, as well as oriental mustard, condiment, and oilseed types. So it's really covering more bases here. So there's a lot more information on this label. And this label is an older label, or sorry, a newer label. It's more of an updated label where the active ingredients have been updated, and this label has been updated more recently than some of the older labels. So what I'm finding is some of the older labels don't have the wording that some of the newer labels do. So if you look at some older products like malathion, you may see some archaic or confusing wording in it. And on the products that are newer, there is more information on that label. So there's definitely a difference between the labels and whether or not the product is an older generic or a newer one that's still proprietary. Now, I have another one, but I'm not going to go through label scenario 4 because we're running low on time, but I just wanted to give you an overview of some of the things that you can run into with labeling. I know you know your labels, I know you read your labels and you understand what's on the label, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background on how labels interact with each other. What happens when you're tank mixing? What happens when you're adding different adjuvants? What happens when you're spraying crops that may not be specifically labeled for use, or where the wording is ambiguous? So this is more the world that I work in, but I know that as applicators, as retailers, as professional agrologists, you're running into these scenarios as well, because when you do run into issues in the field, I usually end up getting the question at some point over the season where someone says, hey, we got dinged on an audit and we can't figure out what we did wrong. And I'll have the applicator, the retailer, and the field agrologist all coming to me and saying, we don't follow it. It can be pretty complex and it's not all clear cut. So I just wanted to provide a little more insight into labeling and some of the issues that you can run into, and why when an inspector comes your way and says, I guess the warning that I keep getting when I go into talks where the CFIA is presenting inspections or audit reports, they keep saying over and over again, know your label. And I look at some of these scenarios and say, well, I think I know the label, but it's not always clear uh, whether or not it's not always clear that when I think I'm following the label that I'm actually doing the right thing, because there are these ambiguities and there are these confusing little points. And at times you're just going to have to go get more information. So it's just, I guess, I hope I'm providing a little bit more insight into some of the complexities and to encourage you not just to read the primary, secondary panel and the precautionary statements, but to delve a little bit deeper into the label and see with the products that you're applying, are there inconsistencies in the label? And what do I have to be aware of before we're actually out in the field mixing up the product and we're ready to go? And it's a nice calm day and it's going to be sunny. We don't have any rain in the forecast. It's perfect application weather. It's perfect staging. That's not the time where you need to, where you have, that's not where you have the time to start delving into the label in detail. This is really the time to do it now. So I'll end it there. And if there are any quick questions, I can answer them, or people can always get a hold of me later on.
Awesome. Any questions for Ron? Oh, Ron, I'm not sure if you're still here. We did have a late question come in. Devin Mitzner asks, any way to report ambiguity in labels so you can resolve or update the label if it's just a label error and no actual issue between generic products? Feel free to reply to Devin Mitzner's comment then, Ron. And thank you very much again for coming and speaking at our event this morning.
Thanks, Sean. We're on a break till what, 10 to 10?
Correct, yep.
Okay, so I can answer the question that I got from Devin Mitzner. He says, is there any way to report ambiguity in the labels so we can resolve or update the label if it's just a label error or no actual issue between generic products? Um, the answer to that simply is no, it's not easy to resolve. Any label change has to be made through the PMRA, and the PMRA is backlogged. There just aren't enough people there to do the work that needs to be done, and this is just my opinion, but there are an incredible number of really hardworking, dedicated, knowledgeable people at the PMRA. I just don't think that they have the resources that they need. But when we need to make wording changes to the label, even for things like a user requested minor use label expansion, we have to go through the PMRA and we need the registrant to approve the wording. So we need an approved label by the registrant before we submit it. And we need a letter of support from the registrant. We need support. We may need support from the province if it is an ERMUL. But if it's just a wording change, there are some instances where the PMRA can make wording changes. What I'm finding with the registrants is they're reluctant to make requests for wording changes. The reason is that they have major registrations going through, and they're reluctant to plug up the system with requests for wording changes when the PMRA is actively involved in approving new products. So that's a quick answer to that one. If you're asking questions about generic labels that don't have the label statements that proprietary labels do, there are rules behind that one. So when a generic registrant registers a generic product after it's off patent, there are certain rules they have to adhere to bring that product to market. And they usually end up with a label that I like to refer to as the static label. Whatever label is in existence at that time, that's the label that you get on a generic product. Now, if a proprietary manufacturer takes that one active ingredient that has gone generic, and you see this a lot with herbicides and fungicides now, is they'll take that generic active ingredient, mix it with a proprietary ingredient that is on patent, and sell it as a two-way product. So there'll be two active ingredients in there, or three active ingredients in there, or even in some cases, four active ingredients in there. So there'll be anywhere from one to three active ingredients that are off patent and one active ingredient that's on patent. That gets sold as a branded product as if all of the active ingredients are on patent. The manufacturer, the registrant, will update that label. They may add new crops to the label. They may add new use patterns to the label. They may add new pests to the label. Those cannot be added to the generic label. So the generic label with one active ingredient gets left behind and it's static. When a registrant takes that active ingredient that's gone off patent, combines it with something new, and produces a new product by adding a proprietary active ingredient, that label is submitted new to the PMRA. They will add uses, they will add crops, they will add pests, they will add use patterns to that. But the generic, and then usually what happens is the registrant with the proprietary product will likely no longer sell their version, their old version of that proprietary product. So that comes off the market. So you have a whole bunch of generics with one active ingredient and you have a new product. with 2 active ingredients in it, and that product is better, it probably costs a little bit more. Now, if the generic manufacturers want to change their label and add a crop to their label, what they have to do is they have to apply to the PMRA for a label change. When that label change goes to the PMRA, then the PMRA needs to access the data package. So all of the residue data, all of the toxicological data that was used to register that product originally, and that might have been 15 or 20 years earlier, the proprietary manufacturer registrant has to issue a letter of permission for the generic company to access that database. Without access to that database, the generic manufacturer can't make changes to the label. And I guess if I were in the non-generic or the proprietary manufacturing end of things, and I have been, I worked in industry and research and development for 20 years. So I know what's happening there is a generic manufacturers coming into the market and then going to the registrant that's lost the patent and saying, would you mind if I access your data package so that I can add all your new uses and other uses that I've come up with to my generic label so that I can sell it at a lower price than you and still make more money than you're going to make with your proprietary products. And if I were the registrant in the proprietary stream, I would say no. Not without some kind of a commercial agreement where you pay for access to my data. I'm not going to let you come into the market and undercut me on price and then give you all the data for free so you can make your label better and become even more competitive. So that's really the issue that we're dealing with there. Now there are some registrants that work with some more generic companies. I guess I look at it as there's the proprietary manufacturers, there's the generics, and then there's an in-between where you have some companies that sell generic products, but they actually buy the product from the original manufacturer and pay the original manufacturer for the product, and then they sell that product. So in those cases, we are able to add uses to what a lot of people think of as a generic label, because that generic manufacturer is actually buying the product from the original registrant, and the original registrant makes money on it every time a jug is sold in the field. Where generic is sold, the original registrant doesn't make any money on that at all. So that's just a bit of background on the commercial end of things.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ron.